literally in March, a week into the shutdown, one of our minority business tenants at the airport called me, and he said, "Sam, we're about to go under. We're in so much trouble right now. We're hemorrhaging money. We're about to lay off everybody. We need to meet." And so I literally just drove down to the airport and met with all the minority business owners. Like we did literally a round table of everyone, and I just sat there, heard them out, and we tried to figure out how do we save you guys, right? So we came up with the creative ways to, forbearance, difference. We have our lease structures are very unique, and so we did as much as we can on the lease side. We gave them 3-year lease extensions, right? And they took those 3 years lease extensions to the bank and got a bridge loan, right? So we got really creative with how we were going to save them, and I'm really proud to say that not a single business at the airport went out of business.
Wow,
You
that's
saved those
amazing.
businesses,
Nice.
man.
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, if there's anything that I'm the most proud of, it's that's probably at the top of it's one
Wow.
of the top 3 for sure.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to Pochi Bubble Tea Spill the Tea. Welcome to the next episode. Today we have a really special guest. This guest is a current commissioner, port commissioner since 2019. He was elected and became president just recently in 2023. So that's super exciting. He is the first one, the youngest to have reached that, and the first person of color to be able to achieve that. That's wonderful. And then also he is the son of immigrants who from South Korea, and who actually came through the port of Seattle, which is kind of cool.
That's right.
Sam is very interested in shaping the economy of the future, and he has also served as an appointee under President Obama. So Sam,
You did your
welcome
homework.
to the show.
Yes.
Yeah, I need to clarify these days when I say my parents immigrated here through the port of Seattle, everyone thinks, "Oh, like so they came on a boat." And I'm like
Yeah.
no. Like, and the reason people I know that is cuz my mom came up to me one day and she's like, "Why does everyone think that we came to this country on a boat?" And I was like, I should probably clarify. They flew into the port of Seattle.
There you go.
The port of Seattle is both the airport and the seaport, for those who don't know.
Yes.
Very
That's
important.
good clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate. I'm honored to be here. Very excited to talk about everything and anything.
Well, we go wherever the conversation goes. It's kind of funny
Yeah.
when we first met. I remember in Kirkland, it's like, man, this guy's got a really cool jacket.
Oh.
Yes, that's how we
It's
met
like, I
Sam.
love that jacket, and then we just kind of talked from there.
It's funny because I tend to go to Pochi's kind of after a long day or after, I have a lot of events. So your staff probably recognized me as the guy who's always wearing a suit or something fancy because I'm always coming back from some political function or something like that. So they're like, who's that weird Asian dude who comes in like these trench coats and stuff?
That's awesome,
So I
though.
appreciate it though.
No,
They
that was good. So Sam, like,
Yeah.
what's it like in the day of the life? I mean, Mr. Blue Checkmark, you're man, you're pretty popular. Like you've done some things. So what's like your regular day to day?
It's
like?
it's a good question. Real quickly on the blue check mark, I got the blue check mark because obviously I'm an elected official, right?
Yeah.
But when I got the blue check mark, I only had like 800 followers on Instagram, so I kind of made a joke, like to myself that I might have the record for the lowest follower count for a guy who has a verified blue check mark. So I used to tease myself about that. I'm a little, I'm up there, but I'm no like influencer level. As a port commissioner, I think it's a mystery to a lot of people. Like, what does that even mean? What does that entail? As a port commissioner, my job is to really set policy that govern both the seaport and the airport. And just real quickly, the Port of Seattle entails the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, which is our single largest airport in the region, but also the seaport, which actually has a lot of different aspects to it. The first thing people think about is containers, right? Container traffic is what everyone thinks about. I think during the pandemic, everyone suddenly cared about the port because their Amazon packages weren't arriving. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
The number of calls and text messages I got from people saying, "Hey man, I have a container stuck at the port."
Really?
Oh yeah, dude. Like I get text message, you're like, "Hey, this is my container number. Can you help me figure out where it is?" And I just be like, "Yeah, let me just drive down to the port and like look through all the containers, right?" Like, it was a crazy time. We could talk about that a little later, but and then obviously we have the commercial fishing. If you ever watched Discovery Channel's Deadliest Catch,
Yeah.
all
Oh,
those
yeah.
vessels are actually home ported in Seattle.
What?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. The Pacific
Oh,
Fleet is home
interesting.
ported in Seattle, in Fisherman's Terminal and Pier 91. So they all go up to Alaska to catch, everything, and then come down and process it down here in Seattle. So
Mm.
very
Oh.
little known fact about kind of for the fishing industry. That's why I think we have the best seafood anywhere. I think maybe that's why we have so many great
Yeah.
Japanese sushi spots in the area,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Makes
true.
Yeah,
sense.
and then cruise. Oh, we have the largest cruise gateway on the West Coast. And so the port is very, very comprehensive in what it does. And so as a commissioner, I make sure we have the right policies that govern the port. Uh, I'll do a lot of business development for the port. So I go out and try to bring business into our region, right? Fundamentally, the port is an economic development agency. We are here to create jobs and economic opportunity, right? So that means when it comes to imports and exports, I go out and say, hey, you should be importing and exporting through the Port of Seattle. And when those containers come through our gateway, that creates jobs, right? Cruise. Obviously, cruise industry takes a lot of hands. It's a
Mhm.
huge economic stimulus. Actually, there's a really interesting fact. There's about, for every cruise goer, they spend about $1,800 in the local economy, right? So these are
Oh.
people who fly in, stay in the hotel before they get on the cruise, and maybe stick around and do touristy stuff in Seattle after the cruise, right? And our cruise season is, in the summer, it goes from Seattle to Alaska and Alaska back to Seattle, right? And so that's kind of our bread and butter as a cruise industry, and we have about 24 million cruise passengers every summer, right? It's
Wow.
crazy. It's a huge
Yeah.
economic stimulus for our region,
Nice.
um, and obviously the airport, thousands of jobs for small
Yeah.
businesses, right? Like Pochi's, we try to get small minority businesses into the airport behind security. So when you see a lot of the concessions, a lot of the dining options, right, we're very conscious of, are we bringing in a good a diverse group of restaurateurs and service providers. And so that's my day to day. Like my head is always in, what are we doing to increase economic development and opportunities for people.
You're
Man.
definitely shaping the economy of
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
future of the
yeah,
Seattle area, which is like phenomenal. Say, how did you even get into this? I mean, everything
yeah,
you're doing now is just like, oh my gosh, it's insane. But like, how did this even start?
yeah. So to be perfectly honest, I never thought I would go into politics per se. I studied international relations as an undergrad, and econ as a grad student. I went to the London School of Economics, and my goal was actually to become a foreign service officer or or diplomat, right? A
Oh.
U.S. diplomat. So I actually like studied for the foreign service exam. It was getting ready to be a foreign service officer, and so politics, especially domestic politics, was like of no interest to me.
Mhm.
Interesting.
I was more of a foreign policy. I kind of specialized in like the Asia region, whatever, right? And so I was getting ready to take the foreign service exam in grad school, and then this opportunity to be a legislative assistant or a staff for a member of Congress kind of came up, and he was looking for someone to do foreign affairs, trade, and defense. Like that's the portfolio of work that he needed someone to do. And so I said, oh, like this would be a good opportunity for me to work in Congress as a transition to foreign service, right? So it's a good experience. I kind of learn how our legislature works or whatever.
Mhm.
So I went there, and I worked for a while and about a year, and I just kind of it was a trap, uh, and you kind of get thrown into the lion's den with national politics, and even if you work on foreign affairs, trade, and defense, which are very like national and international issues,
Yeah.
like all politics is local, and so I kind of got thrown into the local politics of stuff. And then, as you mentioned earlier, after about 9 months of working for this member of Congress, I got a call from the White House, and they were like, "Hey, we heard about you. We would you be interested in working in the administration?" And I thought I was getting like scammed.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Because when the White House calls you, like it doesn't say White House, right? It actually says it's a screen number. You don't know who's calling you, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So and so, I was like, does anyone say no to that question? Of course, I would be honored, right? And so I went through this whole process, got appointed to work for the administration. I served as a special assistant at an agency called the General Services Administration. Did that for the last 2 years of President Obama's term,
Wow.
and then
That's crazy.
yeah, and then obviously Donald Trump got elected. He wasn't interested in keeping me around, so that made my decision to move back to Seattle that much easier, right? And so, fast forward. to being back in Seattle, I was kind of actually stuck because you think about back in 2017, Trump had just won the White House.
Yeah.
And as a former staffer, I thought, oh, I can just go back to working for a member of Congress. But the problem was neither the Democrats didn't have either chambers of Congress, right? We didn't have the Senate, we didn't have the House, right? And there was a ton, like, people don't realize how big an administration is.
Yeah.
And when I say, oh, I work for Obama, everyone's like, oh my God, you work for Obama? But there was like 3,000 of us, right? I'm like one of 3,000, right? So like, think about it. There's 3,000 former Obama appointees looking for jobs,
Oh,
Right.
that's
right? It was
crazy,
a cutthroat job market for us when the job market was not very good for Obama people. Everyone was looking for Trump people,
Mm.
right? Because no one had, and that didn't exist. There was no such thing as a Trump person, right? Because he was so new to politics,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I decided to move back. And I was actually on unemployment, and I was like really struggling to find a job. And so I was like, one day I was just reading the news, and I read about the bird flu epidemic in Asia. And this is wild. And I know this is a long story, but this is, I think it's worth telling. Every year in Asia, there is a avian influenza. It's a flu.
Every year?
Every year, every winter, they have bird
Wow.
flu. But the problem in 2016 was it was like a strain of bird flu that was extremely bad, right? And so in 2016, right as the administration was ending, like all these Asian countries were starting to kill their chicken flocks. They were just wiping them out because they wanted to stop the spread of
Yeah.
bird flu. Well, when you kill chickens, what happens? You get a shortage of eggs,
Yeah.
right? So countries like Korea had a crazy shortage of eggs where the price of eggs went from like $3 a carton to like $10 a carton, right? And there was just a mass shortage. And so the Korean government and other governments in Asia actually reduced their, it's called a tariff, like it's basically a tax they put on goods that they import.
Yeah.
It went down from like 23% to 0% because they were trying to encourage people to
Yeah.
import eggs. And then they started to subsidize the cost of shipping, of freight, right? That's how desperate they were to
Wow.
try and stem the shortage of eggs. And so obviously at the time, having done trade policy and knowing this, having studied econ, this was a very unique arbitrage opportunity that I saw. And so I kid you not, I literally like drove to my nearest Costco and like looked at how much a 36 pack of eggs was, which
Yeah.
was only like $3.50
Yeah.
or whatever. And I thought to myself, oh, maybe there's an opportunity here, right? And so I started cold calling egg farms, just and the first egg farm that gave me a shot was Wilcox Farms right here in Roy,
Wow.
Washington.
Nice.
Yeah. So I literally flew to Roy, Washington, Seattle, drove down to Roy, met with the Wilcox family, and somehow convinced them to give me a shot at exporting eggs, which is not something that was very common back then. And so that's how I got into exports. And so I ended up exporting a lot of eggs, like
That's awesome.
2.5 million pounds of eggs.
Oh
That's
my
That is
crazy.
goodness.
awesome.
Yeah, and that's how I got into the import-export business, and then obviously that transitioned to in 2019 when the port commission job became vacant because my predecessor decided to retire. People were hitting me up and saying, "Hey, dude, like you worked in policy in DC, you do exports and imports, you should run the port." So that's how I ended up thinking and getting into the mindset of, yeah, maybe I can run the port. Maybe I can, and I was 29 at the time, which was pretty young, and I was single. I had nothing to lose, to be honest. It was like a, let's try it, and then I won. So here I am.
What
That's
a
awesome.
story.
That's
Yes,
awesome.
Yeah,
that was
a
cool.
great
That was a
story.
cool story.
Yeah,
I
that's
love
a
that.
great story.
Dang.
Man, 29.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like we were just talking earlier, you're gonna be up for re-election soon.
That's right.
So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
A little bit of a. Are you nervous at all or anything?
I'm not as nervous as I was when I first ran.
Yeah.
I think the first time of anything is because there's like in politics. I mean, there's this really famous saying that Rumsfeld said. There's three things. There's three certainties in life. Like there's the known, the unknown, and the unknown. Right. So
Yeah.
like when you don't know something, you can learn. But I think when it comes to politics and campaigning, there's a lot of unknown unknowns, things that you're just not aware of or you just don't know.
Yeah.
And when you run for the first time, because you don't have the experience, you kind of you're just thrown out there and you either sink or swim. The second time around, it's easier because you kind of have gone through the process.
Mhm.
Also, over the last 4 years, I've built up my base, and people know me now, and I have kind of the clout and the credibility. When I first ran, no one had any idea who I was. They were like, "Who is this 29-year-old kid trying to run?" And not to mention, my opponent was actually the mayor of Bellevue.
Oh,
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
So no one gave me a shot. They were like, "This kid's not gonna run. This guy's doing it to get his name out there, or whatever."
Mm.
Like all these like
Yeah.
dismissal like assumptions they made about me. I beat the guy by 20 points. Like it wasn't even
Oh
close.
my
Yeah.
gosh.
So
Dang.
everyone looks at how I did and they're like, "Oh, this guy clearly had it all planned out, and like
Mhm.
this was part of his career." And it's like, no. Like, you think I predicted Trump winning? And, you think I
I don't think
predicted?
anybody did.
You think I predicted the worst avian influenza in the history of Asia? No, of course not. Right? There's just I just kind of roll with the punches, and I've been very blessed.
It sounds like you found the opportunities in
Yes,
everything, which
absolutely.
is good.
Yeah, no, I think that was for me. When you look at my progression of the career, it was just embracing those opportunities, and I embraced the right ones clearly because I'm very blessed to be where I am. Yeah.
If I wasn't a fan of you already, I am now. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Appreciate you.
that.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
congrats, by the way, you were appointed president this year.
Yes,
Commissioner
yes.
president.
Yeah.
So how has that been?
Man,
for you?
it's been being a commissioner is a lot of work, but
Yeah.
being president is kind of what I say, more work for the same pay. The president role is very
Yeah.
different because you're the de facto leader of the commission now,
Mhm.
and so what you do is you kind of control the agenda, you kind of set the priorities for the year and whatnot, and so it's a far bigger leadership role, and that actually requires you to be a little bit more out front, right? And so you're doing more like media events.
Mhm.
You're kind of the spokesperson for the port in many ways.
Mhm.
I'm also traveling a lot more. I was just in Singapore, Taiwan, and Korea as part of a trade delegation in a mission to go basically be an evangelist for the Puget Sound, right? Again, saying, "Hey, like you should do business here, right? Like bring your containers here, right? Set up your warehouses here, right?" And so that's kind of what you do as the president is you're more out there. It's more very
Yeah.
external facing, and so it's been very busy. It's been tough on the body, but
Yeah.
the soul is very very feels very fulfilled right
That's
now.
good.
That's
Yeah, I've
good,
seen your
yeah.
stories and stuff. You're traveling a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because during the pandemic we didn't travel at all, right?
Yeah.
For like 2.5
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
no one traveled, right? So I think the muscle of traveling, everything from packing your bags to getting through an airport, has atrophied over 2 years, right? And so when I started traveling again this year, or like towards the end of last year, I remember like I literally stood over my luggage bag and I was like, "How do I do this again? Like, what do I need again?" Like,
Yep.
like I
Yep.
busted out my toiletry bag and like dusted it off. Like it was just weird to kind of get back into the groove. But I think now I'm pretty good at all that stuff. But even like the airport, I'm like, when I first started traveling again internationally, I was like, oh yeah, I almost forgot my passport actually because I was just so not used to traveling for 2 years. Yeah, if it wasn't for one of my like assistants saying, "Hey, don't forget your passport," I probably would have missed some flights. But anyways, yeah, I am traveling a lot. Yeah, it's good for the mileage, the points.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For the points.
the
You get comp
status.
for that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, totally. Yeah. So obviously, if you go on an official trade mission, it's an official trip. Yeah.
I like that you as a politician, you came in with shorts and with a t-shirt. Like this is so cool. Like
Yeah, I appreciate that. I actually contemplated what to wear today for like 10 minutes. I was like, should I come in more formally? I was like, no, I'm just gonna be myself.
no, that's great,
No,
man.
that's
I
good.
love
That's
that.
good.
Yeah, I think if there's anything that people say about me, it's that like even as a politician, I come off as very genuine, and I don't, what you see is what you get with me.
Yeah.
To be
Mhm.
completely frank, I don't put on a facade. I don't pretend to be more proper or prim than I really am. Sometimes that rubs old school politicians the wrong way.
Yeah.
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 The other day, I actually wore like a suit with a t-shirt underneath, and someone made a comment about, "Hey man, where's your shirt and tie?" And I was like, "I'm the president, yo. I'll wear whatever I want."
Yes.
I'm
I love
the
yeah,
confidence.
this is Seattle casual right here, right?
That's awesome.
To be candid, I didn't wear a tie and shirt because it was kind of hot, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to wear a tie today," right? And so,
Yeah.
but yeah, like I try to be as genuine as
Yeah.
possible. Maybe it's because I'm younger than most politicians. Maybe because I consider myself a new generation
Yeah.
of politicians, but I don't really see myself as kind of the mold of what you would think of when you think of a politician.
No,
Yeah.
definitely not. I mean, you're so like down to earth and just like easy to talk with versus
Mhm.
like if I came across an older school politician,
Yeah.
I'd be like,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. 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 No, and even I, like, to be candid, when I talk to other politicians, I feel that way. And maybe that's
Yeah.
part of
Mhm.
the imposter syndrome that I struggle with as a young
Right.
politician, as a young elected. But there are still those, 50, 60-year-old white dudes who like to be respected in the old school
Yeah.
ways, and
Mhm.
they don't like to be called their first names. Like, I don't think you all have ever called me commissioner. I actually prefer to be called Sam. Like, I'm not about titles. There are certain situations or circumstances where it's proper to call me a commissioner or President Cho,
Right.
but in 99% of the time, even my staff just call me Sam, and it breaks down barriers. Like, I have a
Right.
better working
Mhm.
relationship with my staff and those who work with me in other governments because they feel like they're more personally connected to me. I can
Mhm.
have frank conversations with
Yeah.
people because I can call you by your first name and not Commissioner Cho, right? There's no formality there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a big plus in my work, and hopefully that's the trend, right?
I love that. So
Yeah,
would you
Yeah.
say that kind of relationship has made your job as president a lot like I don't want to say easier, but kind of smoother?
yeah, I think so. I think so. Like, a lot of people call me and text me. A lot of things, a lot of channels of communication that may not have been the norm in the past, right?
Yeah.
Usually, like, you work through staff, right? Like, like, m- my people will talk to your people, right? Like, that's the, like, that's the old school
Yeah.
politicking way, right? But I'm not like that. If I need
Yeah.
to talk to somebody about a policy issue, I just call them up and say, hey, like, I want to hear from the horse's mouth. Where are you on this issue, right?
Yeah.
And how can we bridge the gap,
Yeah.
right? Same goes for other younger politicians that are doing the same thing. I have a lot of political figures in my phone that I can just call up and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? It speeds up the process because you're
Yeah.
not going through staff and you have this, like, weird communication issue, but also it helps build those relationships with those leaders so that you can make decisions faster. And I think one of the things people have the biggest gripe about politicians and policymakers is like, yo, you guys work so slow. Like, why can't
Slow
you just
moving.
Right.
get things done, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's some of that formality and lack of relationship is a huge part of why things don't get done. Yeah.
I love that. Hey, you guys, you can ask questions because I'm just kind of curious, so I'm
Yeah.
just spouting off questions.
No.
So like, go for it.
I
I don't want to hog
almost
it
just
all.
like enjoy hearing this whole story. Like, like,
Right.
just keep going. I'm soaking it all in right now because, yeah, like you were saying earlier, like most people just have no idea of like
Hmm.
what the Port Commissioner does, what the
Yeah.
Port of Seattle encompasses. So it's really interesting to kind of hear that
Hmm.
and hear how like so down to earth you are and how relatable you are. And I could see how that translates into your work because it does like speed things up
Yeah.
and the way that you do things in terms of just focusing on the relationships. It does make the process go a lot smoother. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, we literally just talked about how we're in the people business,
Yep.
and it doesn't matter what field of
That's right.
business you're in. It's a people business, and it's all about how you work with people.
right.
And I think that really shows like how much more you can do
Yeah.
when you're able to work with people
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Because for me as a politician, being accessible and personable also means that people will just come up to you and ask for
Yeah.
you for,
Mhm.
so just to give you another example, I said earlier during the pandemic, people were calling me to try and get their containers out, right? Like, if I was an old school politician that had like that wall, like, no one would call me and be like, hey, can you get my container out?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's because I'm so personal, because people feel comfortable coming to me for help, that I get those calls and texts. And I don't, I mentioned that jokingly, but I personally value that, right? And the reason is because at the end of the day, as much as your business is about people, right? Politics is about people,
Mhm.
right? And my theme has always been putting people over politics,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, when it comes to change policy or what we're doing at the port, right? I want the feedback loop between what I'm doing and the people that I'm affecting through my policies. So, for instance, if hypothetically, Pochi's was at the airport, and
Well, you know.
you guys have a problem, right? Like there's
Mhm.
an issue with your spot, or I would hope that you feel comfortable enough to hit me up and be like, hey man, like our AC is down, right? And yeah, that's like a small issue, but of course, like if that happens, I put you in touch with the right people to get it fixed right away, right? As opposed to
Nice.
going through this long bureaucratic process, right? Or like these policies at the port are not working for us as a business,
Mhm.
right? The biggest lesson that I learned was actually during the pandemic, when our businesses are we call it ADR, airport dining and retail, right?
Mhm.
Think about all the restaurants and brick and mortar businesses at an airport. They got killed during the pandemic,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Killed. No one was flying,
Yeah.
which means
Yeah.
there's zero foot traffic, which means there's zero business, right?
Mm.
Now, just to give you a sense, on a day to day, SeaTac has 50,000 passengers that go through TSA.
Wow.
Okay, that doesn't even include connecting flights. Okay, so that's just 50,000 people going through security, right? At peak pandemic, it dropped to 3,500 a day, right?
Whoa.
And so those mom and pop businesses, those minor businesses that we worked so hard to recruit and invested millions of dollars to build out the space and stuff, they're getting hammered. And to make things worse, a business behind security in an airport can't do DoorDash, they can't do Uber
No,
Eats
they
Yeah.
can't.
because those
Mm.
drivers can't get behind security to pick up the food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for them, it was like stabbing them twice in the heart,
Yeah.
right? And literally in March, a week into the shutdown, one of our minority business tenants at the airport called me, and he said, "Sam, we're about to go under. We're in so much trouble right now. We're hemorrhaging money. We're about to lay off everybody. We need to meet." And so I literally just drove down to the airport and met with all the minority business owners. Like we did literally a round table
Mhm.
of everyone, and I just sat there, heard them out, and we tried to figure out how do we save you guys, right? So we came up with the creative ways to, forbearance, difference. We have our lease structures are very unique, and so we did as much as we can on the lease side. We gave them 3-year lease extensions, right? And they took those 3 years lease extensions to the bank and got a bridge loan, right? So we got really creative with how we were going to save them. And I'm really proud to say that not a single business at the airport went out of business during the
Wow.
You
pandemic.
Nice.
That's
saved those
Not a
businesses,
amazing.
single
Nice.
one.
man.
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, if there's anything that I'm the most proud of, it's that's probably at the top of it's one of
Wow.
the top three for sure.
That's powerful.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just
But
amazing.
answered one
again,
of my
the
questions.
point
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
that's the feedback loop we
Yeah.
established, right? Like, if I was an old school politician, would
Yeah.
a minority business owner been comfortable calling me and saying, "Hey, we need help"? I'm not so sure. You never
Yeah,
know.
because you don't know the problems if
Yeah,
they're not brought up to you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if
That's
you're
true.
listening to this or watching this, put a pin on this, save this episode, because you don't know, in like 10, 15 years, Sam might be running for a different presidency position.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, you never know.
Or someone who looks like me, hopefully.
Yeah.
Dude, that would be so cool.
Yeah,
That would be such an amazing experience. And just like,
yeah,
I mean, with everything that you've done so far, how you've taken challenges and just kind of flipped them.
yeah.
Um, even within, yes, as big as Seattle is, the SeaTac airport is, but you managed to save all those businesses that were there. Like not a single one went under.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a huge
there's
feat.
there's something there, Sam. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
man, this is so cool to be able to hear this and like listen to you and your story, because like this is something that I don't think anybody would probably know otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot that happen at the port that people don't know otherwise. It's only when your Amazon package doesn't show up that I start getting tweeted at, like, where are my goods? I think for the first time during the pandemic, when
Yeah.
there was a lot of congestion at ports and ships were outside the harbor waiting to get in,
Mhm.
Mhm.
people for the first time understood, oh, that's what you do as a port company. Like that's
Yeah.
what so it's only like when things are going bad, when like your flight gets canceled,
That's true.
or like
Yeah.
you're waiting in a TSA line,
Mhm.
or I got a text the other day and my friend was like, dude, why is only one security checkpoint open? I'm standing in line forever. Like these are the text messages. Only when things go wrong do people like kind of reach out and understand what I do. But there's a lot of good stuff that happens at the port that falls under the radar for sure.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. And one thing I know I really appreciate about you, Sam, is you really work for the people.
Mm,
Like
Mhm.
everything that you've said so far, and like the work that you've done, and the things that you've accomplished, you do it for the people.
thank
And
you.
it's
Yeah.
like whether Republican or Democrat, like there are old school of either side of those that are
Mhm.
just for themselves. They're just
Mhm.
old, kind of the kind of old guard.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You have to go. You want to talk to my people? Have your people talk to my
Yeah,
people?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you're just the person that's like, hey, how can I help you?
Mhm.
What can I do? And that I appreciate that
Yeah.
like 100%.
I mean, and I think for me, that's fundamental to why I do what I do. Like it's
Mhm.
a lot of people ask, like, why'd you get into politics? Why are you doing this? And for me, it was about the public service. It was
Yeah.
about bettering the human condition and people's lives. And this is my way of affecting change and improving the lives, especially in minority communities. The last couple of years have been very difficult, right? People forget I got elected in 2019. In November 2019, I got sworn in January 7th of 2020, and the first case of COVID was actually January 21st, 2020. So like literally 2 weeks after, and the dude actually flew in through SeaTac,
Yep.
by the
Oh,
way.
yep.
Yeah.
And he's
Oh
from
yeah,
Snohomish
yeah, yeah.
County, but he actually flew in through SeaTac from I think it was
Mhm.
Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of thrown in with the wolves, and then we also obviously had the George Floyd protest and the anti-Asian hate. And so to be candid, I think the timing of my uh, being a public official, I don't want to say it's serendipitous, but it was good timing in the sense that I could leverage my position, my platform to really advocate and help people. And um, so yeah, it's been an interesting 3 or 4 years. Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I don't know if the previous mayor of Bellevue that when you were running against would have been elected. I don't know if he would have been able to save all those businesses.
Yeah,
Like
well,
Yeah. Right.
that takes a different kind of like mindset and
Yeah.
planning.
yeah, I think it's all about lived experience, right?
Yeah.
And I was a business owner myself, and I
Mhm.
understand how difficult it is to run businesses. You all run
Yeah.
businesses, and it's difficult. My parents were immigrants, and they ran a dry cleaners for for a long time.
Yeah.
And so to have that experience, lived experience as an immigrant, as a person of color, as the son of small business owners, as a small business owner myself, this is why we say representation matters,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? And to have diverse leaders in our governing bodies is so important for this exact reason. There's no better example of a minority business owner reaching out to the only minority commissioner and
Mhm.
saying, "We need your help."
Mm.
Yep.
Right. So it's a beautiful story, and I'm just very grateful to have been there at the right time. Yeah,
Fantastic. What's your parents think about all this? Like, I mean, your journey has been one
Yeah.
heck of a
bruh.
journey,
That,
dude. Like,
that's
what's
a
your
loaded
parents
question,
say?
man.
Yeah, yeah.
Because Asian parents, man,
Yeah.
they
Yes,
got
yes.
some standards.
Um,
Okay.
so what's interesting about my parents is that they never actually imposed any one career on me. It was, I think that's a lot of people say, oh, you got to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer or whatever. My parents were always like, find your own path, right? And so I think that was what made my parents unique. Uh, but my mom, uh, you know, she actually had 3 rules for me growing up, and she would say this incessantly. She said, there's 3 things in life you should never do: drugs, gambling, and politics. I kid you not. I grew up. My parents were like, "Don't do drugs, don't gamble, and don't go into politics." Right? And so I don't do 2 of the 3. So I guess it's like a D, right? 66%, right? But um, but what I will say is that my mom is like all in, and this is the thing about Asian parents or just parents in general. She was skeptical when I went into like policy when I
Mm-hmm.
was
Mhm.
like working for members of Congress, right? She was okay with me working for Obama, right?
Mhm.
But she was still kind of like, don't go into politics, don't go into politics. I don't want you to be a politician. And I was actually the most nervous to tell my parents about running for office because I didn't think that they would be all for it.
Mhm.
But the second I told them I'm thinking about running for office, they were all in, man.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't even like hesitate. They were
Yeah.
just like, "What do we got to do?" Right? And so for me, like I'm extremely grateful because like they were trying to guide me a certain way, but
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
second I made a decision and said, like, this is the way I'm gonna go, they're like, "We got you. We're gonna support you. We want you to succeed." And
Mhm.
uh,
Awesome.
and so my dad, he actually passed last year for a heart attack. But he was, I'm just really glad that he saw me get elected and saw that my path as a politician was panning out. And my mom is obviously extremely proud of everything. I take her to a lot of events
Nice.
because she
Good.
likes to be there. And
Yeah.
my mom is very young and beautiful, and so a lot of people think that she's either my sister or girlfriend, and then she loves that. She digs that. But I think going back to like, what do your parents think? I think it's very common for our community, especially in the AAPI community, for people to be turned off by politics. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that there's a lot of generational trauma within API communities when it comes to politics and trust in government, right? It kind of goes back to our immigration roots, right? Like, think about why a lot of our families immigrated here. Like, if you're Vietnamese, you're probably a refugee fleeing the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War, right?
Yeah.
If you're Cambodian, it might be the Khmer Rouge, right? From my parents and a lot of Korean Americans, they grew up under authoritarian regimes, right? So on a fundamental level, when you come to the United States, your perception of politics and policy is shaped by what you grew up with, which is not a positive view of politics or government. And so when you grow up in these AAPI households, you're not encouraged to go into politics. You're not really, how many times have you sat down on the dinner table and filled in a ballot with your family as an AAPI family household? Never.
Never.
Even today, I've never sat down and filled a ballot with my family, right? And so this is the I think the unique challenge that we face as a community. And when it comes to API representation in politics, I do think that we are kind of on the upswing now. And I think for me, if you grew up in Washington, you were very fortunate to have grown up, seeing Gary Locke and a lot of APIs break through in a way that actually has not been done since Gary Locke, right? He became the governor of Washington in the 90s, which is crazy to think about, given like it's hard to think of a governor of Asian descent today, right? And so I think we were very blessed and fortunate here in this region. But as one of a handful of AAPI politicians, it's not just the work that I do today, but it's kind of the pipeline of future leaders for tomorrow that is another passion of mine. Making sure we're mentoring the next generation and stuff like that. Long story short, I mean, there's a really long answer to your question about how my parents feel about this, but my parents have completely flipped their perspective on politics. They see the good work that I'm doing, and they realize that, we need good people in good places, right? And so my mom is very proud.
I have no doubt you've done them proud.
Yeah,
I mean, you've made some waves in the community. Like even though people may not know of what you've done, you've done some great things.
Thank you, man.
Which is phenomenal. I know, like, as we talk about the kind of like a Asian kind of household part of it too, I think that why we're not encouraged to like even look or think about going into politics, you're kind of sticking out.
Yeah.
When you go into politics.
There's that saying, right? If you're the nail that sticks out, you get hammered.
Yep.
Yeah. But the counter to that for me is that, there's a saying in politics, and it's a little cruel, but if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu.
Ooh.
Oh.
It's crazy. Just think about that for a second, right? And how many times in our history as a community have we become victims of bad policy?
Yeah.
As a result of us not being at the table, whether it's the Chinese Exclusion Act, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, right? If we don't show up, if we are not the nail that sticks out, right, and we're just, we're not visible.
Yeah.
We're left behind and or victims, right?
Yeah. You're not part of the conversation.
Exactly. You're not part of the conversation. And that's how you end up with bad policies that really screw us, quite frankly, right? We're just not even part of the equation.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, yes, like, you might get nailed a couple times. I'm sure I'll get nailed as a politician for being who I am and a genuine politician that wears shorts or a t-shirt to a formal event. Right. But, we're tough as nails, bro. Like we're resilient. And I think that you can hit me with a hammer over and over and over again. And I'm gonna stick out. This period.
I think what's been ingrained is that kind of like immigrant mentality of like I'm gonna make things happen no matter what.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of resilience in that.
Yeah. I do think when you grow up watching your parents hustle, it
Mm-hmm.
does instill a different
Hmm.
mindset in you. Um, yeah,
So,
it's interesting because it's so contrary to the stereotype of Asians.
It
yeah.
is,
And
right?
APIs, we're the quiet ones. We're the ones that don't.
That's why it's so different.
Yeah,
It's such a because it's that's why it's so hard for many people to get into that or
yeah,
have a voice or feel like it's okay to speak up in that way
hmm,
and get into politics because politics is all about speaking up,
yeah,
right?
Hmm.
yeah,
And I think our community is so used to not speaking up
yeah,
that it's so difficult to wrap our minds around like how do you even do that in the
yeah.
first place or
Hmm.
want to do that.
It goes back to the unknown unknown, right?
Mhm.
Like you
Yeah.
go into this uncharted territory of being political advocating, and you're not really sure how or what the reaction to that will be, right? And so it's kind of this idea of like, yeah, we just won't play in that space. We'll just keep our head down and do the work. I think part of what we need to be better about as a community, and I think we learned this during the pandemic when all this anti-Asian hate was happening, is we need to be we need to be less reactive and more proactive when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to advocating for a community. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we do is that we do our own thing, and then when we become a victim, we become very loud,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
right? And we're advocating, we're fighting, and then we go back into our corner,
Hmm.
and then we wait for that next thing that kind of pokes us or something,
Yep.
right? But the reality is that if you want true power and capacity to affect change, you need to build up that muscle. It's just the same thing as my point about traveling. Like you need to build up that muscle, right? And you can't just
Mhm.
assume that you can go into a boxing ring and box somebody because you know how to throw a punch, and you're like, yeah, I'm good, I can throw a punch, and then you come back someday and like win a fight, right? That's just not how it works. It's not
That's
how
how
it
you
works.
get knocked out.
Yeah, that's how you get knocked out, right?
Mhm.
Like that's not how it works in life. It's not how it works in politics. You can't just show up when you feel like it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
or when you feel like you're being backed into a corner and start throwing haymakers, right? You,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
really do have to exercise and build up the skill. And I think our community has been too reactive to things like this, and we need to become more proactive. But I'm encouraged because I think this pandemic has really forced us to turn that corner and build up that muscle memory. Yeah.
Well, I think you're definitely leading the way there, Sam. So that's
Yeah.
excellent. That like we appreciate that because that representation in within that community and that the culture, um, in politics is kind of huge because like you said, we don't see that
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Well, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was actually gonna ask because we were talking about kind of like the our growing up and kind of like what has been ingrained in us. But could you tell us a little bit about your parents' story and how they
Yeah.
immigrated here?
Yeah. So my dad was actually the first to immigrate to the U.S. My grandmother was married to my biological grandfather, and they got divorced when my dad was pretty young. And then my grandmother actually remarried to an American soldier, a GI. And so, which was very unusual back then, actually,
Yeah.
because first of all, it was unusual to get divorced, but then to remarry was kind of taboo in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And so I think that's why she chose to like move to the U.S. So when my step grandfather or whatever you call, remarried grandfather, decided to was stationed back in the U.S., that's how she immigrated here, and eventually my dad and his two sisters all immigrated to the United States. Um, my dad went to UW for a couple of years, and then he met my mom, who was in Korea. She grew up in Korea, and they you know had me, and so my mom was like, "All right, I guess I'm going to the U.S., right?" So my dad actually dropped out of UW in his junior year
Oh, wow.
because he needed to like provide for
Yeah.
his family, and so they were dry cleaners. So my parents
Hmm.
had a small dry cleaners in Fremont in Seattle. It was called Clean Bee Dry Cleaners. If anyone's OG and knows the Clean Bee Dry Cleaners, and so growing up through middle school, my parents were dry cleaners. I always kind of make the joke or the that my parents scrubbed white collars for a living, and now I wear white collars for a living. And so it's kind of it's in
Nice.
many ways there's a lot of full circle
Full
moments
circle.
in my
Yeah,
Yeah.
family, right?
definitely.
Like
Your whole
my
life is a
Definitely.
full
yeah,
circle.
yeah,
Yeah.
seriously, like my parents immigrated to the Port of Seattle on a plane. And now I run the Port of Seattle. My parents were dry cleaners, scrubbing white collars. Now I wear white collars, or I guess I don't wear white collars because I got called out for that. Uh,
Sometimes.
but yeah, sometimes, most of the time, I'm in a collared shirt. But Yeah, and then my dad ended up selling his dry cleaners, and then starting like various other businesses in construction and whatnot as well. And so yeah, very very prototypical American dream story, quite frankly. Only that their American dream ends with their son becoming a politician and not a lawyer or a doctor.
That's
Yeah,
okay. That's okay.
yeah,
You're spearheading the way.
yeah,
So,
I actually had a
yeah.
question. He's talking about like just being so personable and being able to reach out to you, like if anybody at the airport, like when they needed help during the pandemic and stuff. I'm sure a lot of that is like the connection that gets built between yourself and the constituents and
Mm-hmm.
stuff comes from, you're very easy to talk to and
Yeah.
you're very well spoken. Have you always been like have you always been pretty well spoken like as a child and outgoing and stuff, or did you kind of learn all
Dude,
this as you went into politics
I
good
and
I
like
question.
I can't I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough for asking that, because everyone sees who I am today and
Hmm.
assumes this is how I was
Yeah.
my entire
mhm
life. And to be honest, I was not a well-spoken person. I was
mhm
not an extrovert. I still don't consider myself a full extrovert. I was not the popular kid, right? Like if you had talked to like Sam of high school and or junior high and told him like you're gonna run for office someday and get elected,
yeah
people, thousands of people are going to see your name and fill in a bubble next to it. I would be like, what are you talking about, right? I was actually a very shy kid. And I think uh, if you had seen me in high school, no one would have described me as a leader.
mhm
Um, I think uh, leadership and all these things were skills that I built up over a long period of time.
okay
All right. And I think it was partly because, as a kid, I wasn't exposed to politicians or leaders of a certain caliber. Right. And so I was pretty like, you know, I was very heads down. I was the nerd, did good in school, played a few sports, but was never like the jock or anything like
Yeah.
that.
mhm
But I think in college, in my 20s, working with leaders, working under politicians, working for Obama, you learn things. You
mm,
watch and you see and you find mentors. And I really built up, again, going to the theme of building up the muscle of being what I am now. You say that I'm very well spoken, and I appreciate that, because quite frankly, like 10, 15 years ago, I was not like that. Like I would not have described myself as a natural public speaker or anything like that. It does come with, and quite frankly, like I'll be honest, like if I don't do this for like 2 or 3 months, like public speaking and
you
stuff,
lose it
I lose it.
yeah
Mm.
During the pandemic, it was very interesting because when you're campaigning, you're always out there.
Yeah.
You're always giving stump speeches. For about like 6 months, I was campaigning so hard that I had my stump speech like ready. I was like this, like crazy. During the pandemic, when you're like in your bedroom and atrophied, right, for like 2 years, and then after the pandemic, when like you go back out there, my brain was not functioning the way that it did when I was campaigning. Like I couldn't get the words out of my mouth fast enough. Like I
mhm
was, I was like off my game.
yeah
So I had to build it back up a little bit as well, and obviously there's like the awkwardness of like, do I shake hands? Do I not shake? Right. So again, like, a lot of the skills, the hard skills that I have today as a politician, as a leader, has been developed over, I would say, over 10 years. And so it's funny because I hear a lot of young API uh, folks who are interested in politics,
Hmm.
but there's, I can never run for office, right?
Mhm.
And I said, why? And they're like, well, like I don't have the charisma, I don't have the public speaking skills, I'm not really good with people. And I tell them, dude, you can learn all that stuff. Like it's not, you can, those are all things you can improve,
Hmm.
mhm
right? And build upon. And so I never let any of that stuff kind of stop people from becoming, going into policy or politics or anything forward. So yeah, I the guy you see today is not the guy of 10 years ago, for sure. For sure. I was a completely different guy.
okay
Yeah,
I like that. All the skills are learnable.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
mean, you went into it with a good intent. You just learned all the skills along the way.
Yeah.
mhm
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
And,
important part.
I do think that there are certain people who are born with certain skill sets that
Yeah.
are, you know, the guy in high school who just has this charisma is very,
Hmm.
people gravitate towards him, or like a guy who's just naturally well spoken because of for whatever reason, right? But you can improve on any of those things, right? And it's just about hard work and putting in the work,
Yeah.
honestly, And so, yeah, if anyone's out there doubting that they can do any of this, there's no secret sauce. It's just hard
Yeah.
work, honestly.
So, what would be like your advice for somebody who is interested in going into politics or
Yeah.
maybe interested in working for the Port of Seattle? Like, what would they need to do?
Yeah. So, I think for me, some of the single most important things in not just in politics, quite frankly, but in business or any career, whether you work for a corporation, is like uh, my network has been the single most important thing that I've had in my success in business or in politics, right? And one of my mentors had this amazing advice, right? In today's society, right, success is not based on what you know; it's based on who you know,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and it's not based on who you know; it's based on who knows you.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
not based on who knows you; it's based on what they say about you,
Mm,
right? And so for me, it's meet as many people as you possibly can in the political space, right? Find mentors, find find people who can help you. I have another mentor who'd always say, "Look, Sam, if you ever make it to the top, it's your job to send the elevator back down," right? And so for me, I like to talk to a lot of youth today about policy and politics. And let me just say real quick, like the youth today are so much further ahead than I was. Like even
oh
like
my gosh, yeah.
it's
Hmm.
crazy how
Yeah.
smart and how informed they are. And I don't know if it's TikTok or whatever, but like I talked to some middle schoolers and they know more about like API history and politics and policies. Like they're talking to me about issues that I'm still learning about,
Hmm.
right? And so I'm really encouraged by that. But um, you got to find good mentors and people who can help you figure out your path, the way that you do things, right? um, and so I think that that's key. Whether it's a business or politics, having that network to rely on, having good mentors, getting good advice, and figuring out what is your unique path to and also just like ask yourself, why are you interested in politics,
Yeah.
right? Why is that the way? I think part of what makes allows me to be genuine as a politician is the fact that I am not married to the idea of being a politician, right?
It's excellent.
If
Yeah.
someone voted me out tomorrow because, oh, this guy is a joke, he wears shorts and he doesn't wear collared shirts, I'm okay with that. I'll go do something. I'll start another business, or
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't have to be in elected office, and that kind of sets you free in a way, right? Because you're not thinking about getting reelected or appeasing this guy because I want him to vote for me,
Hmm.
right? So I'm just gonna say whatever you want me to hear, right? Which is the case for a lot of politicians,
Yeah.
right? And so I think for me that's key. Ask yourself why you're doing this. For me, it's affecting change and serving the community. But affecting change and serving the community can come through different ways. I don't
Yes.
have to be a politician to affect change and serve the community, right? You can be an
Hmm.
appointed official. You can be a politician, but even in business, there's a lot of social impact and ESG stuff going on that you can do, right? So for me, it's like, okay, my North Star is just, public service, impacting the community, doing good. Okay, so politics is one path to doing that. It's not the only path, right? So if
Hmm.
anyone's interested in politics, it's not about the title, it's not about the clout or the credibility or whatever or the blue check, right? It's about what you want to do, right? Don't think about where you want to be. Think about what you want to do. I think that's key.
Yeah.
That's very key.
And I love that you brought in of having the North Star because it
Yeah,
that truly is like so key because if you have
absolutely.
something that's bigger outside of yourself
Yeah,
that's more motivating and more
yeah,
purposeful than just having a position holding a
yeah.
title, you
Hmm.
know.
People get the North Star really twisted, actually,
Hmm.
because like when you think about a North Star, it's like, okay, this is what I'm working towards, right? But
Hmm.
that which you're working towards, a lot of kids today, and I'm guilty of this too, right? When I was in my 20s working in DC, when people I interned for an embassy once, and the foreign service officer or the diplomat was like, hey, like what do you want to do after you graduate? And I was like, oh, I want to work for the United Nations, right? I want to be UN. Yeah, I want to work in the UN. And he goes, dude, I didn't ask you where you wanted to work. I asked you what you wanted to do.
Mm.
I was like, oh, I never made that distinction in my head.
Yeah.
But his point was like, look, the janitor at the UN works at the UN too. You want to work there? You want to do that? Like, no, I don't want to be the janitor at the United Nations. And he was like, so what do you want to do? Right. And I think our generation is so enamored by I want to work for Google or Facebook,
Mhm.
or I want to, be an entrepreneur, or be the CEO of a company or whatever. Right. And they don't really they only think about the where, but they don't really think about the what.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the what is what gives you the longevity in your career. People burn out, not because they don't like what they do; it's because they forget why they're doing it.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
I think,
the why.
it's all about the why.
Yeah.
And the what.
And that's why the North Star is supposed to be, it's not the end point, it's the
Right.
guiding.
That's
Mhm.
right.
It guides you. It's supposed to
Correct.
guide you.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you guys, this was an
Yeah.
amazing car. I feel
Yeah.
like we
I
just
think all I did was
scratched
talked. Yeah.
I think we
That
just
was
scratched the
great.
Loved
surface,
it.
man. I think
Yeah.
we keep asking you questions, but I want to make sure we respect your time because you're a busy man. You've got a lot on your plate, and the Port of Seattle is in the palm of your hands.
Don't tell
So-
my colleagues that.
Well, I mean, you're definitely serving the community. You're taking care of the people that you. And this is what I really appreciate is because for us, our core values are we take care of the people that we work for, and those are the people that are working with us. And as commissioner president, you don't sound and you don't come off like I'm the president. It's like
Yeah.
these are the people I'm taking care of,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we definitely resonates with us because that's something that we try to do as well. So
I love that. I knew there was something about you guys when I first met you.
And
Thanks, Sam.
I think what not a lot of people also know is like we've only had a handful of conversations
right.
with Sam.
yes,
And so
and total coincidence too. Like I would just walk in. And you guys would be there,
Yes.
right? It's not like we ever like scheduled to meet up or anything.
yeah,
Nope.
no, we've never actually like hung out outside of this
Yeah.
or like seen each other outside of Pochi actually.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
here,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
Pochi.
Yeah.
And everything that you have been talking about, like Sam is actually living this out, guys, because we're like
Mhm.
living proof of this because we've only had a handful of conversations with Sam, and here we are today having this conversation on our podcast. So like, thank you for
No,
doing what you
absolutely.
do and being who you are, because that's kind of what led us here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. What a great experience. I appreciate it. And we're going to have to change that. We're going to have to go
Yeah.
get some Korean barbecue. or
I
something.
Yeah.
100%.
I'm good
Yes,
with that.
please let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Sam, and you guys. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Perfect. Thank you.